Two key starters on both sides of the ball for Utah are moving on. One to the NFL and the other hit the transfer portal. Let's talk about how Utah will go about replacing them on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcast. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments as well as on social media. You can follow our show at Locked On Utes on X. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by PrizePicks. You can go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. On today's show, I want to talk about two key players from Utah's team this past season that both will no longer be with the team. As I mentioned, one of them via the transfer portal, the other off to the NFL, and how Utah is going to go about replacing them. That'll be more in the second segment. And we'll close with the Utah men's and women's basketball update. Both of them got some wins this week and then are set for big matchups this coming weekend. But talking about first, the big news was JT Broughton today. We've been waiting to talk about Sataoa for a little bit now, but then Mikey Matthews and all these other things that popped up. So I do think it's fair to start with Broughton first. But JT Broughton's moving on. He's been a guy who's been with the team for a few seasons now. When you look at the season that Broughton had overall, had 36 total tackles, only 2 passes deflected, but look, JT Broughton at times this season did not play great, but I will still say this. I think I see a lot of people. I've seen a couple people on social media, saying like, "Oh, he wasn't good this season." I do disagree with that. He was still good. Yes, he got beat at times, but this Utah defense was really good on the season. If you look at the teams that beat them, it's Arizona, it's Oregon, it's Washington. And I mean, even, maybe a time or two against USC, but I don't know. I felt like Utah hung in pretty good against USC even. So it's like, and even against a team like Oregon, like yes, Oregon took their foot off the gas, I will say at the same time, but like they put together a good half against Oregon. They put together a good half against Washington. Yes, Broughton got beat at times, but those offenses beat everyone. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. Oregon and Washington both put up points. Even against each other, they put up high amounts of points. So like, I still feel like JT Broughton did a good job this season. Did he get beaten coverage in moments and opportunities? Yes, he did at times. Gave up probably a few too many big plays. So that's why I'm not like, oh, he was a first team all Pac-12 guy, but I still thought he was pretty good overall in the season. So I think that's where we do have to remember like how dominant and successful the Utah defense was in totality, rather than, yes, they got gashed in a few games, but also who didn't get gashed by those teams. I also just think that's important and bears mentioning. But Broughton, definitely surprised to see him hit the transfer portal. I don't know. In today's world, it could be NIL related. It could be just going off for another opportunity. It's the world of college football we live in now, right? But when you talk about JT Broughton, once again, just a mainstay of this Utah secondary, and I'm very curious to see where he ends up, because he's not coming. I will say, even though I've just defended him, it's not like he's coming off his best season. I feel like you even look to last year was probably a little bit better for him, and obviously dealt with injuries. Did miss that 2021 season for Utah. So there's been some stuff there in his past, but we're just for missing injuries as well. And he's a guy who's been in college for a few seasons now. He is designated as a senior, but he's a guy who's been with the program since 2019 and has played in a lot of games throughout his career at Utah and has done a really good job defensively. So he's a guy Utah will miss. And once again, we'll talk kind of about who some of those players are. I think that Utah will look to replace Broughton, because when you get a guy in the secondary who's that reliable, who's shooting that much good football and help this defense be successful, it is a big loss. And speaking of big losses, that's what Sataoa Laumea is at the right tackle spot for Utah. While Sataoa was not one of the best tackles in the nation, he was still one of the better tackles in the Pac-12 to me. And I've long said before too, he's an NFL guard, and you saw him get beat from time to time, but Sataoa is a really good player and one that Utah will definitely miss. He's been consistently really stout for them, whether that's at guard or at tackle. He's been key to them for the past 2 seasons now. Part of the reason they did win back-to-back Pac-12 championships. And even this year, they were able to keep guys like Bryson Barnes upright for the most part, even if there were games like the pick six Bryson threw against USC. Like that was Sataoa getting beat, but still overall in the season, Sataoa did a very good job, and he tackles. I mean, they're both so important. Each left side more so, of course, because of the blind side, but right tackles become is easily very important too. Like you see NFL teams, they place a premium on both tackle positions now, and for good reason. They're extremely valuable. So it was nice for Utah to have a reliable veteran who's capable of dealing with some of those elite pass rushers. Because yes, Sataoa would get beat, as I've said a few times now, but he would never get like, man, Sataoa is just getting destroyed play after play. That wasn't the case, right? Like Spencer Fano, at times we saw him go through rough stretches. We saw Sataoa would get beat on a play, but I never feel like on a series it was like, man, he's going through a rough stretch. I felt like he bounced back pretty well if he would give up a pressure or something like that. But this is a big loss for Utah, and Sataoa, a guy that, getting this opportunity as Senior Bowl is exceptional for him, and I'm excited to see what he's going to do with that. As I said, I think he's an NFL guard, but I think Sataoa will be the highest Utah player drafted this season. I don't think that's saying anything crazy off the top of my head. Just offensive linemen are at a premium in the NFL, and I think Sataoa is ready to go in and contribute as a guard. I expect him to be in that kind of third to fourth round draft range as a guy who does offer good power on the interior, and I think is solid in pass protection still, and that's where he'll benefit from not having to deal with those elite edge rushers that he dealt with in college. Or I should say, well, you're going to deal with elite rushers in the NFL, obviously, but it's easier to help when on the interior than on the outside. Plus, Sataoa, I feel like he would deal better with kind of the bigger guys that he'll see, those D tackles normally, rather than some of those players like a Latu you see off the edge. He's just not as equipped to handle those elite edge rushers at the NFL level, but I think he'll do well on the interior against those defensive linemen. But once again, just a consistent player for Utah who's been so successful at keeping quarterbacks up for the past few seasons. A guy who's reliable and has generated movement consistently in the run game. Like, these are the losses. We're starting to see the losses the last few weeks. Like we heard, Devon Bailey was kind of the first big loss to me. Then when you talk about Mikey Matthews, Sataoa is the guy who left last week as well. We just haven't been able to talk about this week, as I said. And then JT Broughton, like, these are losses where I'm like, ooh, these hurt. The depth losses, maybe long-term they hurt, but also with the way that the transfer portal works, I trust Utah to be able to bring in guys. And that's what we're going to be talking about on next week's Locked On Utes a lot, is a lot of these players and guys that Utah is bringing in for a visit. Even this coming week, we're going to see Utah bring in a few of them, because that's the way college football is really played right now, is you need to have great transfer players coming into your team. And Utah's done a very good job of that. They're bringing in, I think Kyle Whittingham even mentioned that, they're bringing in less recruits because of how heavy of an emphasis they are placing on the transfer portal. And why would you bring in a freshman if you want to compete right now? You would rather go get someone who's ready to help you compete right now, like a Miles Battle and Leavon Demooney helped Utah do this past season. And I do expect Utah to look that way to replace potentially a couple of these guys. We'll talk about some transfer portal options as well as other options that Utah will utilize to replace Sataoa Laumea and JT Broughton. We're going to be discussing those in one moment, but first want to dive a little deeper with all of you into our friends at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. We are the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch those winnings roll in. With basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball with a special leagues, a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, you could do LeBron James and Travis Kelce at a combo of 10.5 3-pointers made plus receptions. And one thing I love about PrizePicks is they offer a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, the player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with injury insurance policy. You can go to PrizePicks today /LockedOnCollege and use the code LockedOnCollege. That's all lowercase, nothing capitalized, no spaces, for a first deposit match up to $100. Once again, go to prizepicks.com /LockedOnCollege and use that code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Also want to talk to all of you about our friends at UCCU. The UCCU mobile banking app that pays your entire family to learn about money. Kids look to parents to become more financially literate. Parents don't always know the answers. Learn and Earn breaks down financial topics into fun, bite-sized educational games like quizzes and trivia. Every time a family member completes a topic, they earn points that can occur and can be redeemed for gift cards at stores like Amazon, Apple, Sephora, Walmart, Nike, and more. There is age-appropriate content for every member of the family who can compete against each other and track their progress on leaderboards. Learn and Earn is inside the UCCU mobile banking app, so you can play it anytime, anywhere. The more you play, the more you learn, and And the more you learn, the more you earn. Learn and earn, part of UCCU's award-winning B-Money Smart Youth Banking Program, helping kids, teens, and parents have fun while becoming more financially literate together. UCCU, love where you bank. All right, coming back in this one, let's talk about who is going to be replacing these key players that Utah just lost, because these are positions, once again, like if Utah wants to win the Big 12 next year, getting these positions right is paramount. Thankfully for Utah, I think they have players on the roster already that I would feel comfortable with stepping in. And if not, we always know the transfer portal is, of course, an option for all of these positions. First, when you're talking about replacing a JT Broughton, I think there's a couple of names that come to mind right away. Now, one thing that's huge with losing JT Broughton, it makes it that much more important that Zamiah Vaughn came back, right? Without Zamiah, you'd be down Zamiah and JT. So your top two corners exiting? No. Now you have your top, you already had your top cornerback in Zamiah, and now you lose your number two corner in JT. So this is where I think it is nice for Utah that Vaughn is back. So it's about finding those other pieces around them. Now, thankfully, there are still, even with Miles Battle departing, there are still two Utah cornerbacks who logged a lot of minutes for Utah this season. The first one of those who's still currently on the roster being a guy in Teo Johnson. Now, Teo, we heard that he was potentially going to get moved to safety next season, but if Cole Bishop does end up coming back, and I mean, the longer we wait, the more likely that is to me. I guess we'll see after the bowl game. But if Cole Bishop and Sione Vaki come back, those are just two great safeties. You're going to want them on the field at the same time, even if they are more both kind of that stronger safety type mold is where they're more comfortable with overall, but still just really good playmakers. You're going to want them on the field together. There won't be as many opportunities for Teo at safety. There's going to be more for him at cornerback. And I thought Teo really grew throughout the season. I really liked him at safety, but I also thought at corner, you could see moments like I remember one game against Washington. I mentioned moments of growth, but I'm going to take a moment where he messed up. He was in position to make a play on the Washington receiver who caught the pass in the corner of the end zone, but unfortunately just didn't make a good play on the ball. But that to me, that's like, okay, you're in the position, you just didn't make the play on the ball. That is signs. I like if you can stick with the guy, then that's where I think like Sharif Shaw, Morgan Scalley are like, we can help you break up that pass from there as we get you more comfortable with this position. So that's where I feel encouraged about the process that I saw Teo make this season. Also made a number of nice tackles and other plays throughout the year. And yeah, Teo's a guy that I do have some confidence with. Finished the year tied for second on the team in pass breakups with 4 overall, had 30 tackles in total, and that long length, and I think just another year being more naturally integrated into the cornerback position will be good for him. He's a guy I look for to potentially be a starter for Utah this coming year. Also, another guy who got some opportunities, and it was a true freshman. How about Smith Snowden, the Sky Ridge High School product, who come in and got a few opportunities throughout the season. And Snowden, 5'10", 180. Some people like to call him Clark Phillips just because he was a little bit on, the next high recruit that came in. I think maybe a little undersized as well for the position, but he's a guy who did see action a lot this season. He saw action in 10 games in total, had 6 tackles on the season with a season best 3 in the Utah's win over Arizona State. Thank you, Utah Athletics website, for those numbers. But Smith Snowden's the guy, 4-star recruit. We were always very high. And it felt like he would have to sit this year because of the talent that Utah had at defensive back, which is how it played out. And I think next year is going to be a really good opportunity for him to jump in and nab one of those starting spots. And I expect him to do really well. I mean, he's a guy that was a huge get for Utah at the time, and nothing's really changed in that regard, in my opinion. He is still a guy who's going to be very good at just after a year of college and getting his body and just speed up and all of those things, and just having the opportunity to learn from coaches like Sharif Shaw and Morgan Scalley. I think he'll be ready to take the next step. And another guy I'd love to see take that next step is a CJ Blocker. That's a guy we didn't really get to see much of this season, but another 4-star corner. And, according to the Utah Athletics website, he did not see any game action, but he was a guy who was ranked the number 17th cornerback in the country. Let's not forget, by 24/7 Sports. So he's a guy who oozes potential as well. When you're talking about, he's 6 feet, so a little bit taller, but that wingspan is something I know that stood out to me. So I think Blocker's a guy as well who could definitely emerge if maybe Cole Bishop does surprise us and Teo Johnson does go to safety. I would expect to see a lot of Zamiah Vaughn, Smith Snowden, and CJ Blocker. And I think that has a chance to be a really dangerous group of cornerbacks for Utah if Snowden and CJ Blocker can hit their potential. And I think there's a really high chance that those players would be able to do so. So those are the cornerbacks. And once again, the transfer portal is, of course, an option. Just like last year, we saw Miles Battle come in. I will be very interesting to see. And I'd be surprised if Utah didn't bring in a veteran defensive back at this point, because it did work well for them last year. Okay, moving on to Sataoa now. When you're looking at Utah's options at right tackle, Spencer Fano, obviously the guy at the left tackle spot for Utah next season still, we assume, but there's a few options for Utah at right tackle. I think the first one that comes to mind, at least for me, is Tongai, and he's a guy who got some minutes and opportunities this season because he was kind of rotating in with Spencer Fano. And Tongai is a guy too who I like the way he played in those. I like the potential he showed. I should say that because there were definitely there's probably more downs than up. Maybe I'm trying to remember back on the film I watched. Maybe towards the end of the season though I saw improvement. I thought kind of early on that was left tackle was an issue for Utah, honestly, throughout the majority of the season. But I thought Tongai is a guy who has shown that good potential to potentially be a starting tackle for Utah, and I think there could be an opportunity for him to start on the right side. So, and left tackle is harder to play. And in my opinion, still, because that's usually where the best edge rushers line up, even though you do need two elite tackles. And I don't think there's a huge drop off between left and right, but I would love to see Tongai get that opportunity on the right tackle spot. I feel like he's the most ready tackle on the roster currently for Utah. Next up would be a guy like a Falcon Kalmatule. We thought he was going to be the starting left tackle. Didn't quite get that role, but we did see him a number of times throughout the season when Utah wanted an extra lineman in. They brought in Falcon on a couple of opportunities, and his size and strength is just something that's really appealing. We thought he'd start this year, maybe just another year working with Jim Harding, getting the technique and the footwork down, and he can be Utah's guy at the right tackle spot, but has all the intangibles to be successful at the position. A couple other guys, Caleb Lomu, a high recruit for Utah. Maybe he'll end up playing a guard or something first, but he's a guy who played tackle in high school, and I do think could be a successful tackle for Utah, just like how Spencer Fano, we originally thought it would take him a year to get up to, that playing weight, and then he'd start for Utah. Caleb Lomu could be that guy who took this year to get up to weight, and then he's taking the field next season for Utah. That's something I definitely think is a possibility. Also, when you're talking about tackles on Utah, you still got Zero Williams, who's a guy who's got a lot of potential in that size as well. So just about getting the footwork and the consistency, right? All these guys look the part who can consistently execute in the running game and keep quarterbacks upright in the passing game. That will be who ends up nabbing the starting right tackle spot. And transfer portal, always an option for Utah and never a bad one too. Even though Utah hasn't really gone that route with the transfer portal offensive lineman yet, I definitely think it's a place they could consider, because while I like all these options, none of them I'm like, yep, this guy's starting a right tackle, cross it off. It's no longer a concern for me. Just like going into the season, left tackle was a huge concern for me. And we saw that play out a number of times throughout the season where Spencer Fano, being a freshman, he did just have those growing pains. And that would be the same thing if any of the guys I listed, honestly, because even Falcon would be his first time starting, even though he played a lot. Same thing for Tongai. It would be his first time at right tackle being a full-time starter. So lots of moving pieces and parts here, but these are all guys that I do like, and I think have the chance to be elite tackles for Utah come the 2024 season. It'll be interesting to see what we hear about and monitor this battle come spring ball, even though we saw how drastically things can change, because at the time of spring ball, Falcon was the starting left tackle, and then Spencer Fano passes him during fall camp. So always something to keep in mind, that it's a fluid depth chart always when you're talking about Kyle Whittingham-led team. And honestly, college football depth charts just in general are always going to be fluid. So something to keep in mind there. That's going to close out our football talk for the week. Once again, next week, we will be diving into all the transfer portal targets for Utah. That'll be a heavy emphasis on next week's show. But before we get out of here, I do want to check in with the Utah men's and women's basketball team, who, as I mentioned earlier, got wins this week and are slated for big games coming up this coming weekend. We're going to dive into both of those teams in one moment. But first, I want to talk to all of you about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes in eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All righty, coming back in this one, talk about the Utah men's and women's basketball team, talking about the men's basketball team first. The Utah men's team won 88-86 over Southern Utah. Not a impressive showing from the running Utes, but they did not have Brandon Carlson. So definitely became one of those games where just find a way to win. And, one thing that's been fun about this Utah team is it's been guys like surprises, Lawson Lovering, Cole Badgema hitting the ground running. And this game, Hunter Erickson's had some big moments for Utah already this season. And this game had a big moment for Kaba, his best game as a Ute. He was 11 for 12 from the field overall. He had 8 rebounds in total, 2 steals, 2 blocks, and a whopping 23 points. Kaba was a guy last year just still so raw, getting a feel and learning the game, and he's still doing that. You see, obviously, this being his best game, he still has those ups and downs, but he really took over in this game and just had those moments where you could feel that this could be the first game of what could be, potentially a Kaba being one of the best players on this team going forward. And that's something I think a lot of us would love to see, and I definitely think is possible. So yes, it was ugly, but what matters is Utah got the win over Southern Utah. And now that huge game against BYU on Saturday, for all those who listen to the crossover show I did with Jake Hatch, I believe that Utah is going to win if Brandon Carlson plays. If he does not, Cougars haven't lost a game all season, and I don't think that Utah would be able to get the upset to BYU if they don't have Brandon Carlson. And speaking of games between Utah and BYU, the Utah women's team took on BYU last weekend. And I know it's old news now, but always worth talking about when you beat BYU 87-68, which is exactly what the Utah women's basketball team did to the Cougars. And that started their week with a win, but they didn't stop there as they beat St. Joseph's 74-48. This one being played on Thursday night. Alyssa Peely. She had 31 points, 12 of 17 from the field, 3 of 4 from three-point range, 4 of 7 from the free throw line, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal, and a block. This is a Utah women's basketball team that unfortunately now does have to figure out their rotation and what they want to do without a Gianna Neepkins, but that's where it's nice to have players like Jenna Johnson. Now in year 3 with the team, Deja Young's been around a little bit. Kennedy McQueen, a huge part of this team's success. Still got Vieira to contribute in there too. And look, it just gets tough for Utah that you do lose a player like Neepkins. And as I mentioned, I do think that probably takes them out of being a contender for the national championship, but still very much a good team. Hence, they proved it in this game against St. Joseph's. They held them to 6 points in the first quarter and only 8 in the fourth quarter, where Utah really took control of this game, outscoring them 23-8 in that final frame. But Utah women's basketball has their biggest game of the regular season. And I know you could say, it could be a Pac-12 team based on the seeding implications. That's very true. But the Utah women's basketball team will take on South Carolina this Saturday. It'll be in a neutral site as they are going to be playing it in Connecticut. And this is a South Carolina team that Coach Staley has just done a great job retooling and rebooting. They had the top player in last year's draft, and yet here South Carolina is once again 8-0, first in the SEC. They've beaten the North Carolina teams that was ranked. They've beaten Duke, Clemson, Notre Dame, and Maryland were 2 top 15 teams they beat to start the season. All this South Carolina team does is win. They got some size, so that's going to be something Utah has to deal with too. And I know Utah's got Peely, but I'm talking about South Carolina has some real length versus Peely is, a size, but is more of a stronger player than she does use her length to block shots and things of that nature. So very curious to see how this matchup's going to go for Utah. It's going to be an electric one, that one coming up on Sunday, and it's going to be a fun one to see how both the men's and women's teams do this weekend in big showdowns, as well as continue to monitor the transfer portal. And if you have any questions and are curious about anything involving the transfer portal or just things you want me to talk about on next week's show, make sure you leave them in the comments below. Hope all of you have a wonderful weekend and can't wait to be back with you coming up next week as we talk more transfer portal and react to these exciting basketball matchups. We look forward to seeing you then. Have a great weekend.